I don't think people invest enough time with their subordinates. Yeah. If if I don't need to talk to you to fix something, that's it. I have nothing else to say. And it's just like, I mean, I think there can be more than that.
Every episode of this show is ultimately about one person, not the VP or the COO, not the consultant or the framework or the system, the frontline supervisor, the person who's doing the job yesterday and leading the people today, usually with no runway, no training, no real support. Everything I talk about on this show, everything I've built at Operation Lead exists because of that person. And today, that person's my guest. Jared Reining is a machinist at PharmaMed in Fargo, North Dakota. He's worked in machine shops his whole career as a frontline operator and as a frontline supervisor across multiple organizations. He's also served as an infantryman in the Minnesota National Guard. He found this show the way I hope a lot of people find it, through a conversation in the manufacturing space that pointed him here. I don't have a framework for him to validate today. I just have questions. And I think his answers are going to hit closer to home than almost anything else we've put on record. So with all that said, here's my conversation with Jared. All right, Jared, welcome to the Frontline Leadership Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Craig. I'm glad to be here. I'm happy you let me be here.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I'm honored that you would join me today. I've been looking forward to doing this episode for a long time because obviously the name of the podcast is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. And you've spent a career on the front lines of the manufacturing industry, both as an operator and as a supervisor as well. You've kind of gone back and forth in multiple different organizations. So you have a good breadth of experience that can really serve as the voice of the front lines for the audience that's listening to us today, which is both senior leaders in the manufacturing world responsible for the development of these supervisors, but also the supervisors themselves trying to figure out how to navigate that path into leadership. So I know you've shared your story on a few different podcasts, to name a few, the Manufacturing Culture podcast with our good friend Jim Mayer and CNC Underground as well. So we'll refer our listeners to those podcasts to hear your story. But let's just add a little bit of context and flavor to why you're the right person to be on this show today. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I've been in manufacturing at the machine for the last 10 years. I've got probably I think about a year and a half of like supervisor experience at a job I had a while back. And even then I had 2 years with what I call my apprentice. I've been living this thing for a while now. So hopefully I've got some good experience to share with the people.
And I think that's exactly what we need, right? We need to hear what the experience is like on the front lines, being the worker that's being led and being the supervisor that's trying to lead those workers. So tell me about the moment the job changed for you. What was it like when you got that tap on the shoulder to become the supervisor? And how did that feel in that moment? And what were the emotions you were feeling as you were walking in that first day with the supervisor title for the first time?
Yeah. So it's a little different because it wasn't that it was necessarily a true job change. So I was working for a wonderful guy, Nate Lester, at Lester Custom Machine, and I was his first full-time hire. So I had been working for him for a year and a half, 2 years-ish, maybe a little longer. And he brought on Darren, the apprentice, who was a high schooler. And there wasn't no like true him telling me I'm supervisor. He's just like, he was in the office doing all the programming and I was at the machine setting up, running machines. So he's just like, before he comes to me, I'm going to have him come to you. Just give him the next task. So it wasn't necessarily like a true supervisor role. It was more of a point and shoot. He told me where to, like, he'd come up, ask for the next job, and I'd just point him in the direction. He eventually got so good at doing what he was supposed to be doing that he killed most of the tasks that I gave him. So I was just like, all right, I'm going to teach you to set up a machine because I can't have you asking me all the time for something to do. And that's how he blossomed. And I did that for about a year. And then we expanded again and we hired 3 or 4 people kind of over the course of a couple months. And again, I was never certified as a supervisor. So it's technically not my job title, but I had been there the longest. So everybody was usually asking me, how do we do this? What's up? What do we do next? And I got I've got a pretty decent mind for job planning and how to make the machines most effective. So I would just start putting piles of work at the machine so then we wouldn't be swapping tools out all the time. And people would just grab that pile and they'd go through it. So it was kind of effective. Emotionally, it was kind of, I don't want to say overwhelming because I think I handled it well, but there was a stress there. It was fun. It was hard. I don't know. It was something I really enjoyed, but it was because I switched from working with the machines to working more with people. And that's something that I really like.
Let's dive into that. So it sounds like your experience, your first kind of, we'll call it first footsteps into leadership was very sequential, right? It was like one foot in the water, the next foot in the water. Then you were walking
Yeah.
ankle deep. The next thing you know, you were knee deep, and then you were waist deep. Unfortunately, a lot of people just don't have that experience, right? You're an
Yeah.
individual, and now you're a team of 10. The unique
Yep.
thing is that what I'm hearing from you is kind of because your experience was very sequential, kind of the emotional experience was pretty sequential as well. But you still experience some of that overwhelm, some of that stress, the tension between the job you had that was technical, that you felt trained for and you felt prepared for, and then this job of dealing and managing with people, which I'm hearing was a little bit more intuition based for you. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Where was that kind of stress coming from, and how did you manage it?
Yeah. So stress was mostly deadlines. Like it was actually
Mm,
more on the manager side and not so much the leadership side. But we had mostly good people. I liked working with them all. And I'm just a very people focused person. So like when you talk about the way your system works, I didn't struggle so much with the leading people part because that was something I just enjoyed. And I didn't look at it so much as a leadership role other than like, yeah, I was the most experienced, and I guess technically I wasn't even the most experienced. I had had this job the longest. There were people who had more time in service per se than I did, but I just cared about the people and trying to make sure that they did well. So that was easy. The getting everything done was the only reason we hired more people is because we had more work than me and my boss and Darren could handle. So it was piling it on. And then it was very much, how do I get all these deadlines hit? And that
mm,
was more the stressful part. Yeah. And I mean, I did have one guy, love him to death. He was super cool and awesome, but he had very high anxiety.
mm,
And I'd say like, I don't want to say performance issues because he could get the job done, but he just blank on some things. And
right.
so I did slow down and spend more time with him trying to describe like the very micro mechanics of machining because it was like he would have parts that cross two vices and he would see twisting or have some locations off. And I'm just like, okay. So I stopped him that day and I'm like, now I put a part halfway in a vise and a part fully in the vise for him. And I'm just like, all right, I want you to very slowly tighten this vise handle so you can feel how the vice reacts differently. So we got really into the nitty gritty and I knew from the get go that I was never going to be able to do all the work. So I guess that's a benefit for me is I knew I wasn't going to be able to finish everything. So I had to make sure these guys were performing.
That's a lesson so many of us really struggle to learn. One of the earliest lessons they try to teach you as you're progressing as a aviator. Now, this isn't really a flight school lesson. This is more what I'll call a progression lesson. It's when you're going from just in the Army, we call it a basic PI. So you basically have a learner's permit and you're trying to progress to what's called pilot in command, which is where you earn your license and you can be the senior aviator in an aircraft and fly around with junior pilots, basically. One of the first lessons they teach you, or they try to really instill into your mind and how you operate and how you fly as a pilot in that progression series is you have to learn to delegate. You can, as an Apache pilot, you cannot do everything by yourself, right? There are two pilots in the cockpit for a reason, and the senior aviator in that aircraft has to learn how to leverage his co-pilot so that together as a team, they can effectively accomplish everything they have to accomplish in order to have a successful mission and a safe mission and bring the aircraft home safe. And so what I'm hearing from you is so much just maturity and intuition in how you approach the role, knowing that you couldn't do it all by yourself, understanding the people side of leadership, but also not being blind to the success side of leadership. Right? Like at the end of the day, leaders are hired. I say this all the time. Leaders are hired to create an outcome. They're not hired to be someone's friend. They're not hired to make someone happy. They're not hired to give someone purpose, right? Even a lot of those, they're not hired to be someone's coach. Even though all of those are things we associate with leaders, their ultimate job is to create an outcome. And that's where a lot of the stress comes from in leadership is we enter into a position where for the first time, we're in charge of an outcome that we can't achieve on our own. So can you maybe dive a little bit more into how you handled that? Because you sounds like you approached it from a really mature angle.
Yeah. And as I heard you talking that back to me, I was thinking, and I'm just like, I think I'm letting too much of my current bias in the way, and it's making it sound much better than it actually was. Because yeah, the maturity part of it is very much so who I am today, and I think that's coming through a little bit more. I was very overwhelmed, and I think I've targeted that towards growth. And even at that point, I was learning, like I wanted to be a leader. So I was reading a lot of different leadership books even before I had the position. And that helped a lot. So, like your ground school concept, I was putting myself through it because that was just who I wanted to be. And I mean, at that point, me and the owner had talked about how I was yeah, he kind of put the thoughts in my head that I was going to take over for him someday. So I was just like, well, I got to be ready. So I
Yeah.
was pushing myself through that. But no, there was more overwhelm than I let on, which I did from the maturity aspect and knowing that I had to delegate. Part of that is probably the first 3-4 months. I did delegate. I told people what to do and I tried to make them better. But anywhere that my team was lacking, they'd go home at 4 o'clock or whatever quitting time was, and I would stay till 6 because I'm just like, well, I didn't hit the deadlines that I wanted to hit today, so I
Yeah.
push through. And as I talked about in Jim Mayer's podcast, I was living on almost a gram of caffeine every day and drinking a bunch after work just to push through. Which, as the single guy was, I I could do that, so I pushed really hard to offset. But it was that 6, 7, 8 months of progression that led me to that maturity that I started to lean on them more. But even at the end, I was still pulling extra work. So
What is it that you think we're missing when it comes to preparing people for supervision? How could you, looking back, how could you have been more prepared for what the role demanded of you?
yeah. So every place I've worked, none of those companies happened to like think long term about leadership. It's very
Yeah.
much, oh well, we need somebody, so we're gonna promote you. It's everywhere I've been is exactly what you're trying to fix with your consulting and this podcast.
Yeah.
I've had that experience everywhere. My benefit is I'm self-starter or whatever you want to say. So I knew I wanted to own my own company someday, and I knew people were going to be a part of it. So I was pushing myself through your ground school program beforehand.
Yeah.
And I think the mentor leadership is what we call it in the FFA alumni and through our President's Circle program is a lot of leaders need to be thinking out 6, 7 a year in advance. And yeah, let's do some hand holding. I mean, I get a lot of leaders don't like to because a lot of leaders are just like, well, I know what to do, so my next guy should know what
Yeah.
to do. Even in the Army, we talk about it where it's just like, know the guy above you's job so that when
Mm.
you get promoted, you can do it. And anybody who's looking to get to, sergeant and end up at an NCO position is kind of that self-starter and is looking ahead. But I very much believe that while leading up is a thing and it has its place, the authority figure should go first to the younger guys. And I think, or at least I hope, that Darren can look back and see that I was kind of doing that for him. Like I
Yeah.
did teach him a lot of technical skills, but I mean, he's the vice president of the company now, so he got promoted whether it was me or not. I hope that I gave, like, he could look at what I did and he learned something from it, because I was really trying to grow him personally and not just on the technical side, because I think I knew that he has a lot of potential, and I hope that he's gonna grow from that. And hopefully some of the skills and things that I did as his supervisor, he sees, or he does now as the vice president of operations.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because we've talked about it offline before and I've talked about it on the podcast, but I think it's just such an important point to reiterate and bring home because when we think about leadership and we think about leadership development in general, 99% of the time, if there's any development, it's a workshop, it's a training program, it's a course, right? But I mean, think about any other semi-challenging skill to learn in the world. If all you do is read a book about it or listen to a podcast about it or take a course about it, what's going to happen? Can you read a book and know how to go ride a bicycle? Can you watch a YouTube clip and be able to go fly a plane? No, right? And the same is true in leadership. And I think that's why having that structure, but also pairing it with the guidance, like you mentioned, is so important. Now, people talk about mentorship all the time. Some great companies have mentorship programs, but if that mentorship isn't tied to structure, it just turns into a calendar invite that no one's preparing for and they're winging it. And then it's effectively useless. And so we need to tie it to something tangible. That's why I talk about instructor pilots all the time. Instructor pilots don't just show up in the cockpit and say, hey, what do you want to do in the aircraft today? Right? Like in the Army, we have a 300-page manual that details every single maneuver we need to be satisfactory in. And IPs go to school and are trained in those maneuvers and how to teach those maneuvers to standard and then how to evaluate those maneuvers to standard. And so it's the same thing in leadership. Our mentors, our supervisors, whoever they are, they should be able to walk someone who's subordinate to them through the things, the skills, the structure that they need to grow and learn in order to become a leader. So it's, yeah, I appreciate that you brought that up. You've also spent a lot of time being the person on the floor that's being led. And I think that is a perspective that unfortunately is very rarely thought about or heard in industry or just in leadership channels holistically, right? Given your experience in manufacturing in an industry that's gone through a lot of change in the last decade and is going to go through a ton more change moving forward, what has your experience been with the supervisors that have been over you and with leadership that you've been like leadership you've fallen under in general across different organizations? And how has that impacted how you've been able to show up each and every day and maybe how you've chosen to either stay or move on from those companies?
Yeah. I have been fortunate enough that I have had what I'll call good supervisors. Nobody's been belligerent. They're all kind for the most part. I don't know if this is everybody's experience. It's going to be very biased from me, but I'll be honest. I do well. I can do almost anything, pick it up, and after a little bit, I'll be doing well. So like my very first supervisor who trained me, he was probably pretty hands-on for the first like month or two, because like that was, I had zero experience. So I needed it. Like I was not, but then after that, I won't say he's gone. He obviously worked at the machine right next to me, but it was less supervisor, more coworker. We chat about different things. How's the family doing? What's happening outside? But we didn't talk much about work. I got along great. He taught me so much. But yeah, after those first couple months, it was less of a supervisor role and more as we were like almost equals. And that's kind of how that's been the way it has been for me for pretty much every job, where it's just like the first couple months, maybe not even a couple months, couple weeks, they check in fairly regularly, make sure I'm doing what I'm doing. And then because I don't cause any problems, they're just like, oh, I've got no complaints or feedback and I don't think supervisors give enough positive feedback ever, from what I understand, but maybe I just work with people who are, which I think manufacturing, you're going to see that everywhere. You'd have more knowledge than I, but engineers, they kind of lack on the people side. As long as your system is working, they'll be like, well, he's not doing anything wrong. And maybe you can speak more on that.
No, yeah, totally agree. The people that are attracted to be engineers tend to be introverted, right? They tend to be very process-driven individuals. And so you get those personalities that tend to be more task-focused, less people-focused, which, yes, pulls people away from the very things that are needed on the people side of leadership so often. But I think that's a great point. And I think sometimes half the battle in leadership is getting the right people around you, right? And so
Yep.
fortunate for those supervisors, they were able to find a Jared that they could trust with a strong work ethic and expertise and, right? Like give you the tools to succeed and trust you're going to succeed. Given your exposure to the front lines of industry, what have you seen most supervisors struggle with? And what would you say, or what would you recommend to those super?
So I guess gonna call it, found knowledge, or which I guess pretty much every leadership book talks about it, and I'm sure it's time tested. I've just never seen it. I think people lack on, like, I know a lot of people say weekly check-ins. I think you could probably go
Mm,
bi-weekly. It's just like my current supervisor, I do have a personal relationship with him in the sense, but that's because we were friends before I worked there. So like a lot of our check-ins per se aren't business related. We talk and we go outside the work and chat as friends, and I will bring up work problems, and he doesn't as much, which I understand because he's also got to maintain that business boundary where he's got a lot of insider knowledge on the
mhm.
business that maybe leadership doesn't want to express to subordinates, which I mean, I think there's no problem with more information. I don't think people invest enough time with their subordinates. It's always just, yeah. If I don't need to talk to you to fix something, that's it. I have nothing else to say. And it's just like, I mean, I think there can be more than that, but that is a very
Yeah.
big personal bias of myself. And I know that.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend about that yesterday actually, and a huge function of why I think leaders at all levels, this isn't just frontline leaders, but at all levels, why they don't spend enough time talking with and checking in with their subordinates is because they're running at 100, 120% capacity, right? They're going from task to task to to-do list to meeting to meeting to meeting. Their inbox is overflowing with emails they were supposed to get to 3 weeks ago, right? And the problem is when we run at 100% capacity, we give ourselves no capacity for the things that no one's going to force us to do, which arguably 99% of the stuff that makes you a great leader is stuff no one's going to force you to do, right? Most leaders aren't forced to do weekly or bi-weekly check-ins, which is why they rarely happen in organizations. Now, annual reviews always happen, right? Because HR
I
forces
push
them.
back on that, but okay,
Okay,
go
well,
ahead.
for the most part, right? In the compliant, HR compliant type, check the box type organizations. But I think I think it's a simple fix. I think it's a mindset fix, but it's simple in how to explain. It's really hard to scale impact wise throughout an organization. I personally think the fix is to orient every leader not on what they need to do up the chain, right? Not in all the answers, all the tasks, all the problems, all the projects I have to bring up the chain. It's orient every leader down the chain. Because when we shift our focus from serving up to serving down, everything changes. And when we focus on serving down, we realize we need to have that space built into our calendar. We need to have those intentionally scheduled meetings to check in with our people so that communication is flowing the way it needs to. So that would be my argument there. So Jared, as we kind of wrap things up, I want you to share from your perspective what the front line actually needs today. The front lines we talked about it briefly, they're changing a ton. There's going to be 30 million jobs left unfilled, according to many different outlets in manufacturing by 2030. So what is it that the front line needs, and maybe how do you think leadership can fulfill those needs?
That's a pretty tough question. The one
I'm
thing
not quite sure how to help you with that.
that is excellent.
Even Siri doesn't know the answer.
Yeah. The one thing it's just been on my mind a lot lately, and it's probably not industry wide, it's just for me, is I read this book once. It's called There's a Hole in My Love Cup by I can't remember his name right now, but he says, no matter what good things you had, like so many people in therapy and life building, they talk about, well, you got to find the things that bring you joy. You got to find the things that bring you joy. Well, that's great. You can do as many things that bring you joy as you want. But if you've still got a load of stuff that you don't enjoy, if you've got duty on your diamonds, you still don't want to play with the diamonds because they're covered in duty. So find the 5-minute things that you can fix. Like I think it was 2-Second Lean by Paul Ackman or whatever the book is. Andrew Henry from Henry Holsters does it excellently. Yep. Those little 2-minute things that annoy you that you're just like, I'll get to it later. If leaders spent more time just fixing those things, I've got one right now. I won't go into it because I go into a 30-minute tangent on it. That get rid of those little annoyances so that then people can then do their job better. You'll see larger numbers from 2 minutes of fixing. I've been looking at that very heavily in both work and my personal life lately. And just get rid of the things that put duty on your diamonds.
I love that. And I appreciate you sharing. And you know what I think the best place to figure out where that duty is?
It's weekly check-ins, if you ask me.
Weekly check-ins, exactly. What a way to bring the episode full circle and bring it closed. So, Jared, for our listeners, if they want to reach out, get in touch with you, where should they find you? Where can you send them to?
I was going to say LinkedIn. Finding me on LinkedIn is one of the best places. That's where, I guess I didn't connect with you. That's where we started talking, but I got you from the Manufacturing Culture podcast, but that's where I found a lot of great people in this industry. Jim, I'm blanking on the other guy that I'd like to shout out, but I spend probably too much time there as I try to move away from social media. That's one I can't seem to kick because I really like seeing what the industry is doing and who's out there and who's talking about what.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just encourage our audience, guys, go out there and be more like Jared, because he's the example for what the frontline should look like in every organization.
Yeah. Hey, you're doing great things and I'm here to support you wherever I can.
Well, as you can see, Jared is just an awesome individual. He's a passionate machinist. He loves the industry and he's just a passionate human being. He's caring, he's honest, and he just wants to love on other people, which speaks volumes to the type of people that you want to be around, the type of people that you want in your organization, and the type of people that you want to lead. The one big takeaway, overarching takeaway I had from this episode is leadership is a different profession. We talk about it all the time, but being a really good operator, yes, it gets you in the door for becoming a supervisor. And Jared alluded to all the work he had to do to train and develop the technical side in the employees that were working for him. But there was so much more to it. And it was the things that were intangible and the outputs that he was responsible for that were leading to the overwhelm and the stress. And that's ultimately where we need to focus our development, need to focus our resources, and need to focus our support to lift up these developing leaders and empower them to be successful as a group, as a team, so that our organization and everybody in it can flourish. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it shared some perspective from the front lines about what's going on in that frontline person and in that frontline leader for you to take and apply to your organization today. Until the next, I'm Craig Coyle, and this is the Frontline Leadership Podcast. Let's see.